Each year, scores of people die on NT roads. We call them accidents, but mostly they're not. They're fatalities, tragedies mostly caused by human error that was totally preventable. One moment of inattention is all it takes to turn a pleasant drive into catastrophe. I'm Carl Stefanovic, and this is What If? The story of a young man who lost his life because of one moment of negligence. What If is in part the story of Brandon Wilson, who in about 2 seconds should have put on his seatbelt. But the real story is the one that began with Brandon's passing. What if Brandon could have foreseen the suffering on the faces of his family and friends and felt the pain in their hearts? What if he'd spared a thought for his precious little daughter, whose daddy will never come home again? It's a question they'll all ask for as long as they live. What if he'd just put on his seatbelt?
They're not there to make your life hard, they're there to save your life.
The younger of two children, of David and Janet Wilson, Brandon Steele Wilson burst into the world on the 24th of July 1997 in a manner that would characterise the way he lived his life.
Went up to the birthing suite, 9th floor, and I think she was in a total of about a 10-minute labour, which sort of proved what Brandon was like throughout his whole life. He didn't hang around for anything, he just wanted to do something quickly. And he came out very quick.
He and his sister Sammy were inseparable when growing up, despite her being 2 years older.
She would often boss him around. One of their favourite games was, "Come on, Brandon, we need to play schools." And playing schools meant that Sam had to be the teacher, because Brandon was only little and he did everything she said. And she'd boss him about all the time. He'd have to sit down, Brandon, do this, Brandon, do that, Brandon, and he would just do all of it.
While Brandon just wasn't into school, he nonetheless passed things. Maybe he was smarter than he let on. On the other hand, when it came to sport, he was a natural.
Whatever sport he did, he was at the top level. He loved football, cricket, baseball, whatever it was.
He came from cricket to baseball, and he just, as soon as he picked up basically a baseball and threw it, he knew he could play.
He was a very good swimmer. I think he was shocked when he got the club champion.
Didn't take him long to pick the game up, and as it showed that he made the Northern Territory side quite easily in his probably first or second try.
His hand-eye coordination was just ridiculous in some aspects.
He was a good team. He was in a team environment. You need a guy who can break up when things are going bad or things aren't going wrong. You make an error and don't worry about it, mate, or whatever.
As he grew older, he showed he had a number of different sides to him.
He was a very chatty, smart ass, but to me he was like a little brother, so I treated him as a little brother, and that's what I did. Had to clip around the ears a couple of times. You have to clip around the ears, but he'd always come back and bite you.
He was accepting of anybody, and it didn't matter whether you were pink, purple, whatever nationality, didn't matter. If people bullied or anything like that or poked fun at them, he would be the first one there.
Brandon had a distinctive style, a keen sense of humour, and a presence that was obvious to all who knew him.
We had some friends down the road, about 200 metres down the road, and we were down there, had a few beers, and of course we just walked, just been up the road. He was asleep apparently, and so I picked him up and carried him all the way home. And as soon as we turned into the driveway, he said, "Thanks, Dad," and jumped down. So yeah, he just that sort of kid. He was just having fun. Yeah.
The biggest thing about Brandon was his laugh. He had a very unique laugh, and it was very infectious.
Well, he was a very bad dancer. He didn't have the best dance moves, so he would joke around a lot when dancing.
He was a terrible dancer. Some of the moves you would come up with, but as he's doing it, he's got the biggest smile on his face and he's just having a good time. That's how he was.
To his nephews, Brandon was simply Uncle Pooh. His brother Chris will never forget the day he hired a water castle for his kid's birthday party and Uncle Pooh showed up.
He went into my boy's toy room and put on a Batman cape mask sort of thing and a couple of Hulk gloves, and he's just come running out and he's just let it flow, you know, and he's jumping around and sliding down the slide and just to hear my kids laughing and out of joy and excitement, you know, and times like that is when he's Uncle Pooh.
There was a dark period in his teen years when drugs and alcohol took over Brandon's life. His family were worried sick, but David, Janet and sister Sammy never abandoned him, even when he hit rock bottom. Then, something significant happened that pulled him back from the edge. The birth of his daughter Lily was the turning point in Brandon's life, the catalyst that got him off drugs.
Lily made, I think, the best change in his life because he felt like he had something to sort of live for or live towards to give her a better life.
He just loved her, absolutely loved her. Took it in his stride about being a father. I think there was a bit of a learning of being a father, but as there is, nothing really prepares you for parenthood.
The one moment which I can think of is the first time where he showed me his baby girl. It was the happiest I've seen him, the smile on his face you couldn't wipe off.
When she learnt to talk, first word out of her mouth was no, not going to have any of that.
He wanted to be a good father, and that's what he become.
Another significant turning point was Brandon getting a job and becoming an apprentice for a plumbing company.
Within a day, 2 days, the foreman on site rang the owner of the Pacific Plumbing Company and said, "You need to come out and have a look at this kid." And he found his passion.
And I could see that the kid had a lot of good energy. He was very hungry to work and to progress in his life. And he just had a really good energy about him and just a good guy to have around because he was such a great team member. Like, he was always in there, getting it done and probably doing someone else's job also.
But just as the future was looking bright for Brandon, the worst thing imaginable happened. It was late on a Tuesday afternoon, August the 14th, 2018. Brandon was driving his workmate Chris. They were in the company ute on the remote Roper Highway, about 50 clicks southeast of Mataranka, on their way back to their lodgings at Minyeri. No one knows exactly what happened next. Perhaps Brandon had a nano-sleep during which he lost control. All we know is that the ute rolled several times, eventually ending up on its side. But here's the thing. Chris, the passenger, was wearing his seatbelt. Brandon, the driver, wasn't. Chris was relatively unscathed and was able to undo his seatbelt and crawl out, only to find that Brandon had disappeared, no sign of him. He finally found him, badly injured in tall grass, some 20 to 25 metres from the crashed vehicle. Chris tried calling 000, but there was no signal. So he began CPR, till finally a car came along that could alert emergency services.
There was nothing at all in the back of the ute. You could tell that it had rolled a number of times before it had come to rest where it was. There was debris all over the sides of the road, around the motor vehicle, at the location where it had rolled.
Yeah, I was shocked about the distance that he was ejected. I've attended a number of rollovers and even people who've been in the accident without seatbelts, but I've never seen someone ejected so far from the vehicle. That was the thing that we found weird as we approached the scene. We expected all the activity to be around the vehicle, but it's like 20 metres away from the vehicle.
The location where he was, it was a lonely place. I felt that he would have been lonely there passing away. He also had quite extensive injuries to his body, and they were very vivid.
He looked like he had just no blood in his body. He already looked... I won't forget that. The fact he wasn't wearing his seatbelt, the car rolled so many times, and he was thrown so far from the vehicle. He didn't stand a chance.
Coming up on What If, Brandon's family and friends received the shocking news about his death and their messages about seatbelts.
Because the crash site was so remote, it took a while before news filtered through to his loved ones. Brandon's parents, who were in Adelaide at the time, rushed to get on the first flight back to Darwin.
We were sitting at the airport having a drink, and as the news came on about a single car rollover on Roper Highway and a young man dies, you never get over it.
You don't believe it. You're sort of like, what do you mean? What do you mean he's gone? And he's, and he said that, Brandon's died. He's in a car accident. He's been in a car accident. He's died.
I just felt my heart break into a million pieces when I heard that. I just said, it can't be. He was doing so good for himself.
And that's when it really hit me that he was gone. And the feeling's gut-wrenching. You lose part of the family.
Possibly the hardest task was letting Brandon's sister Sammy know what had happened.
It was awfully difficult because we knew how devastated she would be. And she just started crying and crying and crying, and it was horrible because we couldn't take the pain away.
Going to the morgue to formally identify the body was the next piece of the unfolding tragedy.
I do actually remember Brandon Wilson for reasons which you might not expect. I remember him because he was a lean young man. I remember that he had a wispy beard of the sort that lean young men have. And I remember particularly that he had a small tattoo which said Dad with a symbol of a heart on it. And as a father, that's a very moving thing to see for me.
Going to see Brandon's body at the morgue, I realised that it was him. It hadn't really sunk in, I don't think, until you see that. It was covered because the injuries were horrific, but I could see his face, and that's all I needed to see. It was extremely hard.
Despite the sadness of the occasion, the funeral was a celebration of Brandon's life. With the music of Gurrumul providing an emotional backdrop, this was a day not just to farewell Brandon, but also to pay respects to the Wilson family and their standing in the community.
The outpouring of support for us was unbelievable. It was really... I remember a fella at the funeral, so there was probably over about 500 people there, and he came up and shook my hand and said, look what your family means to the community.
It was a celebration of his life. As, we had to make it that.
It was ridiculous how many people were there. And people of all ages. It wasn't just his age group and stuff. There were women and men and kids and people. It was just ridiculous. Brandon had the biggest impact on so many people's lives.
Cheers to Brandon!
Brandon is buried at Thorak Cemetery in Darwin. The gravesite has frequent visits from family members and friends. It's at times like this that close friends rally around to provide support. Andy and Judy Grills, who have been close friends with David and Janet for around 40 years, can't begin to imagine how the Wilsons were able to handle the heartbreak.
I think that's one thing that has to be so hard for Janet because her birthday's a day after Brandon's. So how can you possibly celebrate your birthday and be happy about, your milestones, your own milestones, when your child is no longer there with you?
Accepting wasn't easy. I always would drive down the street, pull into the driveway and expect to see Brandon's car parked on the verge, because that's where he parked, on the front lawn.
I know, speaking to Dave the other day, he said, mate, everywhere I go, it just reminds me of Brandon. I go past that oval, he was playing cricket or footy. I go past a swimming pool, he was swimming at that pool. I just go everywhere he goes. He just finds the memories are always there. He did say, I did think about leaving at one stage, but he said, I'm not going to give up. So, that's mental courage, that's toughness right there and then.
Brandon's sudden death has left a number of people struggling to cope. Some of them weren't ready to be interviewed for this documentary. A number of them are likely grappling with what Darwin psychologist Gregory Goodluck believes is probably survivor guilt.
Survivor guilt in the case of a road accident, such as the loss of Brandon Wilson, is when the person who survived the accident is carrying an excessive load of guilt, even though they're not responsible for what happened.
Chris did everything he possibly could. That young man has seen a lot worse than what we have. We've lost our son and it's tough. But that poor man, he worked on Brandon as long as he could to try and keep him alive.
Having a sense that the family doesn't blame them for the death of their loved one, when it's clearly not their fault, can certainly help a lot with the recovery process.
There's even an old photo showing Brandon being pulled up by police for not wearing a seatbelt. What if he'd learned his lesson from that episode? But obviously he hadn't.
He was stupid for not putting that seatbelt on. That's all he needed to do. Would have taken him 2 seconds as anybody else to just grab hold of it and click it in.
We used to tell him all the time to put your seatbelt on. He was the worst for it. He was honestly the worst for it.
What if Brandon had been wearing a seatbelt when the ute rolled? How different might things be right now?
Chris, his workmate, who was the passenger in the car, obviously had his seatbelt on and Brandon didn't. So as a result, Chris is still here today and Brandon's not, just because of not wearing a seatbelt.
All you think about is 2 more seconds. Chuck a seatbelt on. Right, it's the first thing you think. It's still hard to believe that he's not here.
If Brando had been wearing his seatbelt, this wouldn't have happened.
It's simple. It's as simple as just putting a seatbelt on. It's just as simple as, following the rules. And then they're not there to make your life hard, they're there to save your life.
He didn't have a seatbelt on, so I felt incredibly angry and then incredibly sad.
What if he'd done his seatbelt up that few seconds and he's still here and enjoying life, and everybody else is happy around him, and just that, you always think, what if?
We tried to remind him, but it was when I found out that the other fellow survived and Brandon didn't. It was just,
You never think it's going to be you. One day it could be you. It could be someone you love. It could be someone you care about.
Don't think about yourself. Strap on a seatbelt. Don't drink and drive. Take that extra second to be right. Because it's not just you that you're hurting everyone else. You're hurting your family, your friends, and your whole support system.
Once you're gone, you can't bring back. It's the people you leave behind is who's affected.
And you need to realise that by losing you, the person who doesn't want to wear that seatbelt, the grief you're causing for everybody, for the matter of just grabbing hold of it and clicking it in, you can save so much grief. It's not uncool to have a seatbelt on.
Coming up on What If? A surprise visit at Brandon's roadside memorial and the legacy of his untimely death.
Earlier this year, David and Janet visited the roadside memorial they'd erected where Brandon lost his life. And it was there they had the rare experience of meeting two of the first responders to the fatal crash, Chalky and Claire.
It made everything very real, which we knew it was anyway. But it was things that we didn't really want to hear, but I was happy I did, because they made me feel that they would have done everything they could to save Brandon.
It affects not just the people that were here on the day, family, extended family, police officers, nurses. It also has an impact on first responders.
What really sticks in your mind is that ripple effect and how many people it's actually affected. You know, from those people that were here as bystanders and helped out on the day who've got no medical training, it changes their lives forever. You know, a lot of them can't deal with it, a lot of them end up depressed.
I think it affected them greatly. It was something they'll never forget, and they will, it's not like they've never seen that sort of thing before, but they made me feel like it really affected them deeply.
We learned a fair bit about Brandon that we didn't know before. So yeah, for me it was emotional, but it was a good emotional. It was good to actually meet them, and because it doesn't happen very often. Quite often these things happen and we don't even find out, you know, anything about the families.
For those family members left behind, life will never be the same. Just ask David, Janet, Sammy and Chris about the impact of the loss of their son and brother and the giant hole it's left in their lives forever.
You know, after the funeral, when we were around the father's house, and Lily was there. You know, and each night she'd go out, look up at the stars and say, "Good night, Dad." You know, and coming from that little girl, you know, like, and it's as simple as just putting a bloody seatbelt on. It's not hard.
He's going to miss just seeing her grow up, how Lily grows up, and how she's growing up. She has his outgoing personality, his sense of fun and happiness. He's going to miss her first days of school, going to senior school, marriage, and then, you know, becoming a grandfather. He loved Lily so much, and I could only imagine how he would have been with one of her kids when he was a grandfather.
Brandon Wilson fitted an awful lot into his 21 years. At heart, he was a good young bloke with a great future, a loving family and a wide circle of friends. But he made one stupid, reckless, and sadly fatal mistake. Who knows why he chose not to wear a seatbelt? Given the heartache and devastation he's left behind, ultimately, it was a terrible choice. Brandon can't get a chance to make the right choice, the safer choice, next time. But we can. I'm Carl Stefanovic. Thank you for joining me for this very special program. We'll leave you now with the haunting words of his mum, Janet.
It was the most difficult thing I've ever been through. It's the first thing I think about in the morning It's the last thing I think about every night, that he's not with us.